All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and it is our favourite day today. It's Q&A day. We get to answer your questions, and we cover the question that some of you might be thinking about, and that's saving costs by self-managing the property yourself. We cover that. What else, Ben?
Yeah, Bryce, we're putting a spotlight on the property investor. There's obviously a lot of negative news out there, and obviously tenants are doing it tough. But we are going to focus in on the small business owner that is a property investor and shine a light on how tough they're currently doing it as well.
It's a very big show today, folks, and we're probably going to have to endure Ben talking about Collingwood too, but let's rip into it now.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And Ben, after 463 episodes, I'm not sure if I want to welcome you to the podcast today, but welcome to the couch, mate.
G'day, mate. Yeah, I've lost my voice. Obviously it's been a big couple of days, so it's going to be pretty hard to actually get the pod out today, I reckon, because you might have to do it all on your own because the Mighty Pies
Got the job done, didn't they? They got the job done.
You're channeling your inner Strawny. So on behalf of everyone on this podcast who's not a Collingwood supporter, I sincerely apologise for what you're about to endure. But well done, mate. I just want to send you a little text message. I just want to read a text message out to you.
Sure.
One of our loyal listeners, one of our loyal clients was distressed.
Okay. I don't like distressing our loyal clients.
This is what I received whilst I was away. And because I'm thinking, I've seen the podcast, it's gone out. I was away last week. I'd approved it all. It was all done. And then all of a sudden, something happened at the beginning of last week's podcast. And this was his response. Tell Ben, we all just lost a little bit of respect for him after the absolute cheap shot he has slipped into the start of today's podcast episode. Go Lions. And that was from David Lay. And I went, yeah, cheeky. Here's hoping it backfires on him. And he comes back and says, assume Brisbane win. Perhaps you could say at the start of next podcast that you have been inundated with feedback from the podcast community who have unequivocally called a foul on his poor behaviour, albeit expected from a Pies supporter. There you go, Ben. It was expected. You little cheat.
Well, yes, look, obviously you were away, Bryce. I was allowed to play around. But I thought, why not? I mean, here's the thing. When you're the final two teams in the comp, you've got to love that week, right? You've got to love that week because it doesn't come around very often for a lot of teams, as you would well know.
Yeah, couldn't help but slip that in. Oh, cheap shot number 2.
But yeah, and we've been to the big dance 45 times and only got sweet 16. So we've had a lot of heartache as well. So I wanted to make sure I got the best out of the week because it was touch and go there in terms of whether we're going to get the job done. But to the credit to the team, and well done, guys. They deserved it in the end. Finished top of the ladder, won the most games. They do like to win by small margins though, and that's not good for the ticker. But it was just a wonderful experience to be there. And so yeah, certainly a bucket list memory for me. We talk about on this pod we talk about experiences and how valuable they are versus anything else. So I can tell you that. Yep, one of my, I had 2 bucket lists for the Collingwood Football Club. One is win a premiership whilst I was alive because it took a while.
Yeah.
I'd seen a lot of losing grand finals in the 70s and also the 80s. So that was that. Then I said, all right, well, now I want to set myself a new goal, which was to attend a grand final that we actually would win. So we won, obviously, 2010. I didn't go to that game or the replay. But in 2011, paid the big bucks to go along to watch us against Geelong. And we were something like 23 points up in the second quarter. I'm thinking, this is good, the Collingwood chance going out. They said, this could be a bucket list moment. And guess what? Obviously, Geelong got the chocolates, so that was off the list. And then 2018, I'm like,
Mate, I'm at your place in 2018. That was brilliant. That was an awesome day.
Bryce watched me sit there on the chair and watch that goal get threaded through the needle.
Sheed,
by Sheed. And then obviously I thought, all right, well, if I can get to go, so I put some feelers out there. I was fortunate enough to get a ticket, and then I went along. So, actually Latrobe Financial, who are a major sponsor of the Collingwood Footy Club, thank you very much to Corey and the team there for allowing me to live out one of my bucket list dreams, because it was extraordinary and quite amazing. So thank you very much.
So I've got to apologise to the Stig, because I assured her that segment was going to be extremely short, and you ensured that wasn't quite the case. But well done, mate. I've got to acknowledge for you as a mate that it was a good experience. I don't care about your team winning at all, but I'm glad that you experienced that, so well done. And of course, the Panthers, 3 in a row.
Yeah, incredible.
3 in a row.
Incredible.
Far out.
So you imagine being someone living in Brisbane with the two big codes, having the big final, and unfortunately not being able to bring any of the silverware home. But anyway, your Panthers, that last sort of 18 minutes, second half, unbelievable.
So there you go to our New South Wales and Queensland listeners who say we never talk about rugby league. That's the size of the segment we should have for Collingwood, but because we don't know a lot about the game. Summer series shout out, thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. I just want to pause and just anyone who's hearing this to come on, because we're going to talk about how you've been impacted by interest rates. We're going to talk about how you've navigated that through. We're going to talk about some of the anxieties and the fears that you had. And I found out yesterday, Ben, that one of our team, Amanda, has agreed to put her hand up. She's got an incredible story that she's going to share on the summer series. And Here's what I want to say to some of our listeners. She took a long time to think about whether she would come on, because I've asked her from a long way back. And so the thought and the I guess the think time that's gone into that, because the story is a good one to share. So I tell that story because I want to invoke the same emotion from anyone who's listening to this who might think, oh, I'd like to, but I don't want to go on. I can assure you Amanda's pushing through her comfort zone to come on. So I just want to shout out to you, if particularly the ladies, we want to hear from you. We get an above average amount of males who put their hands up, which we love their stories too. But ladies, this is the shout out for you. Come on to our summer series. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story, leave your details. We'll reach out to you, because we're starting to get prepped for the summer series, which is always amazing, and the angles and the stories and the insights that we get are incredible. And also, Ben, just a little whisper, if you like, that we've got a new course that we're about to release. So we get a lot of people who've read our book, and then they want a deeper dive into how the case studies at the back of the book actually came to fruition. So we actually have lifted the bonnet, and we've actually gone through it. So each case study has about 25 to 30 minutes worth of incredible detail on how that's actually done, what it was like back in 2016, adjusted to present time as well, what the changes are in between, so what you would need to do. So if you've ever wanted to retire on $2,000 per week, stay tuned. We are going to give you some more details on how you can get access to that course. That we only launch it once, Ben, and then once it's launched, we just focus on the intake with the students, and we don't keep launching it throughout the year. So keep an eye out for that. All right, we've got a big show to get into today, Ben. My Mindset Minute theme is I went to the Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within event in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, Ben, and I really loved it. And I've been to America a few times before the pandemic. One of the times Tony was a speaker, so I knew what to expect. I knew the energy in the room. But I booked a ticket back in 2020, and then just kept getting rolled because of COVID. And yes, I did do the firewalk, and it is incredible how you get 9,000 people to do a firewalk, Ben, without injuries and get it done. It's a beautiful metaphor for life. But and here was the amazing part: I had a whole bunch of Property Couch listeners come up to me and say g'day, and I got to hear some stories, and I got to share it with my wife as well. So it was a really great thing. But here's what I want to share today, and I might share a few things as we go over the next few weeks. But
awesome.
Tony talks about 2 master skills for an extraordinary life. And it's number one is the science of achievement. And I think a lot of people on this podcast would really get that, right? The science of achievement, because you don't listen to the Property Couch unless you're an achiever, and there's a science, and we've hopefully broken down what the science of $2,000 a week looks like. But the second one is the art of fulfillment. It's like, So achievement has rules, right? It's a science. If you follow some basic rules for your money, you'll have more of it. If you follow those rules for getting fit, you'll have a fit and healthy body. If you do it for business, same deal, right? So simply put, if you do the right things, then you'll get the results. So that's why it's the science. But here's the bit that really, I took a bit of reflection time over the last couple of weeks, is around the fulfillment being an art. You said it's considered an art because it's different for everybody, and it, just like art, you might look at a piece of art and love it. I might look at a piece of art and hate it, and vice versa. But he says fulfillment is about 2 things: growth and giving back. And I've reflected on that for me and you, Ben. It's like you and I get energized with this podcast, and we still get energized some 8 years later. And if you define what that's, because we get to grow, because we have to keep challenging ourselves each week to deliver something of value to our audience. So that's where the growth piece comes and everything that we bring to it. But it's also for a lot of people, they take all the advice and they go and implement it, and we may never physically experience them at all in our worlds, but they send us a note or send us a tweet or something on Instagram and say, hey, look, I implemented all these things and I've had all these positive results. So we get that through what we do here, and it sort of helps put some language around why we really love what we do here, Ben, because we do get the art of fulfillment around that growth and giving back. So here's what he said: success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure, because there's a bunch of really rich people who are miserable, right? And he talked about the Robin Williams story, Ben, and I thought it was interesting. And I think this is more complex, but if we just stay at the headline level, here's a guy who had Academy Awards and Oscars and comedy awards and Tony and all these sorts of things, and yet sadly took his life, and perhaps because the art of fulfillment wasn't there. So if you go back to success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure, I wonder if people could reflect on that for the rest of the week, because once you get that $2,000 a week, you spend your whole time getting to $2,000. When you get there, you'll go, oh, is that it? So it's enjoying those little things along the way where you actually do get to grow and you do actually get to give back. So I had a wonderful time, Ben. Lots of wonderful insights, and certainly helped me grow over the period of 4 days across 50 hours.
Oh, beautifully unpacked, mate. Well said.
All right. So today, let's rip into Q&A day. It is one of our favourites. Let's have a little listen to the first question from Sean. Around how can I save a few bob, Ben, to help fund my property portfolio. Let's have a little listen now.
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Bryce and Ben, for your advice on your podcast. Based on that, we bought our first investment property just over a year ago, which was great, but obviously went from very rapidly from positively geared to negatively geared, very much so. I know recently you've said hold property at all costs, and also mentioned taking on second jobs, etc. Would you consider removing the property manager as part of this, as this would save us $50 a week, and potentially bring it round to being cash flow neutral? Bearing in mind that we live a literal stone's throw away from our investment property, and I have some friends who are plumbers and electricians, etc. Just interested on your thoughts of whether that would be considered almost like taking on a second job. Thanks.
Well, there you go, Ben. So this is the lengths. So I like at the beginning how he referred to the fact that we say, yep, let's try and hold these properties at all costs. But should we be saving a few pennies, Ben, on the property manager is the question here.
Well, I think broadly when you look at his question, it's really interesting that, in terms of what Sean's saying there, because, look, it's just up the road. So, I should be able to keep an eye on it. It should be easy enough for me. So I can understand why that might shift the narrative and the thinking in that area. I want to double click on the important message here, and that is do whatever you can to hold on to your properties. And I've been on that message now for a couple of months, and I want to keep saying to people, because we are definitely seeing in the data that a few people are tapping out of their investment property. So we'll be talking more about that over the coming weeks. But in broad terms, there's enough evidence out there, isn't there, Bryce, in terms of why you wouldn't versus why you would. So I thought, obviously it's a great segue to unpack some of those messages. So why don't you lead us off?
Well, there's three buckets, isn't there, Ben? If you are a property investor, bucket one is those that hire a professional property management company. That's where you and me are in that bucket.
Yep.
There's a second bucket that those that self-manage and love doing the work.
Yeah.
That's a rare bucket. And then there's the third bucket, which is those that self-manage and don't love the work. And it's really talking to that that third bucket really that we want to talk about here, because some people might do it, love it, but you're a small minority. And so if we go the pro, what are the pros of this? Well, the pro is really simple. You save money, okay? And in the current environment, at $50 a week, that's a significant amount of coin, right? That will certainly help offset some of the costs. But then when we go down the cons side, you might find that this is a little imbalanced, and we're going to talk through some stuff that is totally not exhaustive.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. All right, so let's kick this off. As a con, well, you got to market and find good tenants, right? So this could put your occupancy rate at risk, right? Because the question is, do you have a database of tenants like the property managers? You have social media networks, and so being able to find a tenant. Because here's what the person's saying. It's down the road. Assuming I've got a tenant, they pay the rent on time. Why do I need a property manager? Well, that's because life doesn't work in a spreadsheet, because life happens and you've got to do other things around it as well. So, and here's another truth. Some tenants become skeptical of private arrangements. So they'd actually prefer the distance that's created through having an arrangement. And you've got to be proactive to attract tenants, because it's not just attracting a person, it's attracting a number of people, and then being able to be skilled at working out which one is the best one to have, whilst also being aware that these people have histories that could suggest that at face value, they look like a great tenant, but they may have had a history with the previous property, that the professional property manager has access to the databases, which could give you a bit of insight as to what they are as a tenant. So first of all, Ben, marketing and finding tenants is something that property managers do really well. And you're going to ask yourself, do you really want to do that yourself?
Yeah, and I mean, they're doing it day in and day out. They're casting a net broad. They've got obviously all those platforms to put themselves on. And now, in terms of private managers, they can also use those platforms, but they're also going to be paying a little bit more of a premium to use the platforms, because they're not providing volume to those, realestate.coms and domain.coms and so forth. But that's a good segue into assessing the quality of a tenant, right? You've got to have a good understanding. Ultimately, these people are going to be living in your asset, and it's going to be really important in terms of just how well you can interview them, asking them the right questions, doing the due diligence process that's needed in terms of making sure that this is a reliable person or persons who are going to pay the rent, take care of the property, and have safe and quiet enjoyment of the property that you're providing. And I think, this is the biggest one, Bryce. And if you go back to your buckets point of view, I think, those people who self-manage and love doing the work, I promise you, they won't love doing the work when they've got a difficult tenant. They'll fall into bucket number 3 real quick once they experience a professional or difficult tenant, in terms of that takes up a lot of their time as part of that process. So there is very much that increased risk of poor tenant quality, and I think that to me is one of the big 3 that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, well, the other pillar of the 3 then is legally, right?
Yeah.
Legal issues, right? Because you and I are talking about property all the time. We're talking about legislation. We're interviewing people, and even to this date, when I still ask the property manager, "What's the latest? Has anything changed? Like, I just want to make sure I'm complying, because if you get that wrong, the fines are serious." And so being able to stay abreast of those changes it's one thing to be able to read it and understand it, but then it's the ability to apply it when it matters, Ben. Because even when we've interviewed some of the incredible guests that we've had over this podcast, and they've taken us through all the legislation changes, in some cases over 120 pieces, like I promise you I don't remember them all.
Yeah.
And I have to make sure that I go back and fine tune at the time of needing to make the decision. So I reckon this is a massive one that you wouldn't want to underestimate. Massive.
100%. I mean, this is why also property managers are very selective about the properties that they manage because of the minimum standard requirements that are now in place, especially here in Victoria, right? Where if you don't, if you sign off on that as a property manager, you're potentially liable in terms of, providing unsafe living arrangements or, not meeting those standards. So it is a web of compliance and legalities attached to that. Not only also contracts, how well was the contract written? What sort of contract forms are you using? Because if you're going to do this on a handshake, what sort of recourse do you have if you do get a difficult tenant who doesn't pay? So, yeah, you're right. In terms of poor tenant quality and also risk of legal issues, they're two of the big three in my mind in terms of why I would outsource this, and I'm happy to pay for that service.
Yeah, because you've got to work out what hourly rate you charge on your time. So even if you charge your time at $20 an hour, Ben, it's only 2.5 hours before you get that $50 back. But all right, so let's have a look at some. Let's just break it down. What were some of the basic tasks, and then what's some of the rest? So basic tasks, okay, a couple of maintenance requests, tenanting, which we've just talked about, keeping the tenant ledger up to date, ideally automate that. So okay, there's your basics. All right, let's riff off just a handful of the rest, Ben. Emergency maintenance requests, periodic inspections. What about late payments? What about if someone's moving in or moving out inspections, eviction challenges, preparing a tenancy agreement, collecting and lodging bond payments, paperwork, say no more there. What if it goes wrong? You've got to manage the dispute. You've got to manage the tenancy breach. You've got to issue termination notices. You've got to appear before a tribunal or a court. You've got to make insurance claims. Do you want more? Right. So, folks, it's not something that you want to go into lightly. But Ben, also availability.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're going to have a break, have a holiday with the family, or what, and your tenant's experiencing an emergency of maintenance, who's going to look after that? Now, also, if you're actually doing your gainful work and you've got a critical deadline on a project or you're in a critical meeting and people are trying to contact you, like who's going to actually manage it on your end? And for me, that's the challenge of what happens when you're not around in terms of how that plays out. So, that's that availability risk. And then your tenant's going to say, well, you're never contactable. It's always difficult. And the relationship starts to tether and potentially break down between, you and your tenant. So I just find that, great property managers always have 24/7 contact availability. They have really clear understanding in terms of what the rights and obligations of the tenants are straight off the bat. Now, make no mistake, there are some pretty basic property managers out there. You want to be dealing with really experienced property management business who potentially specialize in this space as well, or just have great people with lots of experience. Once you find those types of property managers, you want to hold on to them because they're worth their weight in gold.
Here. Yeah, and it could also have limiting portfolio growth, because if you're emotionally invested in time and energy consuming, and the degree of separation is actually helpful for growth, because it's like if you self-manage, you might be reluctant to put another one because it just means extra work for you. Whereas if you buy another one and you've outsourced it to others, I think it's it's just human nature. It's like, if I have to do all this work myself, do I really want to double that work or triple that work if I actually buy one or two more properties? So I get the context of this question is probably for a short period of time whilst we're trying to peg back some costs here. But ultimately, it's not like interest rates are going to drop significantly quickly. So it'll be for a longer period of time. So in that case, it may create an emotional response to you wanting to go again if you're thinking about doing that again. So don't have it limiting your portfolio growth.
Yeah, I think there's also another context to that. So someone who's got several properties as well as a block of flats that, there's 5 units within that block of flats. Jane and my time in managing our portfolio does increase over that time as well. So I think it's just important to recognise that. Anyway, moving along, landlord insurances. This is the other big story here, right? Obviously, the two big risks that we need to focus in on, other than obviously making sure that our tenant has safe and quiet enjoyment, is the risk of damage to the property and also unpaid rent. Now, if you look at your landlord insurance policies, that's why defence is a big thing for us. A lot of those policies may not necessarily pay out in the event that you self-manage your property. So it really is an important one there as well.
I went onto the website, Ben, and just got one of the landlord insurers. I won't name who it was, but this is what they said. Using a property manager is generally supported by landlord insurance providers. In brackets, in fact, some landlord insurers like X, the company, will only cover properties under professional management. Why? Because having a professional involved can help minimise certain risks like poor tenant selection, rental losses, tenant damage, and maintenance and repair issues. As property managers often find themselves offering a 24/7 service, they can also get on top of incidents at the rental that can lead to claims escalation and be able to get someone on site quickly to act to prevent further loss. For example, putting a tarp on a roof to stop more water entering the roof when it was damaged during a storm. We understand managing a rental can be complex, especially in terms of legal obligations requirement, and we believe a great property manager is worth their weight in gold, right? So it's not impossible to get landlord insurance, but in a lot of cases, it's very difficult at best. So a couple of other things we can rip through here, Ben. Obviously, the cost is deductible, so you're getting a rebate. There's a bit of fool's gold that could be there because will you measure vacancy in days or weeks? Most do-it-yourself measure it in weeks, right? So, and the days tick away when you're not connected to the right network. So, painters and contractors and handyman and to your point earlier, work commitments, you're not as responsive to the call out. So it's just really establishing whether your time's worth it. So, so just be careful on fool's gold. And then I guess finally, and this is the point we'll talk about in another question later on, Ben. You're running a small business. You got to treat it like that.
Yeah, you do. I mean, ultimately, there are costs associated with running your small business, but you want the best for your small business. And so the same way in which you might be running a different type of small business, whereas a coffee shop or whatever, you've got suppliers, you've got wholesalers, you've got accountants who are helping you in that particular process. So we would say that it's a professional service, and we should put our hand up here. We don't own any property management businesses. We don't receive any funds from any property management businesses. We just know that they are excellent in terms of being able to organise yourself. And as we've said, over my journey, I've had a couple of ordinary runs. I quickly move on from them. And then we obviously once we get our good ones, we stick with them for a long period of time. And we also want to remind them, to keep up to date with, all of the best practices that they're doing. So we always like to still make sure that they're doing their job. And with obviously increased compliance costs and also these new regulations that are coming out, there is additional costs. So those fees have gone up over the course of the last few years. So also be mindful of that. But I can't to Bryce's point, if I summarise this for me simply, if it is a money thing, I really want to factor that into my overall management of my small business in terms of how I'm pulling that together. So if someone still wants to make the argument that they still want to self-manage, maybe another way of doing it is if you do find a really great tenant through a property manager and they are down the road and you over time form a relationship with that particular tenant and they're happy to stay, maybe that might be the only time where you can say, well, what if I'm not getting that longer term value from my property manager, but I promise you, I would not do it from day one. And personally, and Bryce and I are very clear on this, and we're very clear on this to all of our customers, that we don't want to see our clients self-managing their properties.
So I guess in summary then, Sean, it's if it was absolutely critical for you to hold the property, maybe. Otherwise, hopefully you've got the sentiment of that and obviously for the benefit of the community, get to benefit from your question as well. Good question. Thank you, Sean. The next one's from Edward, and it's regarding investment deductions with your principal place of residence. Let's have a little listen to the question now.
Hi. We currently live in a property. We are looking at getting an investment property and maybe moving out of our current primary residency and turning that into an investment property. We are doing some works on it at the moment, new floors, new kitchen, maybe new bathrooms. Is there a way to get them as a investment deduction when they transfer to an investment property? and how can I leverage that?
All right, Ben. Probably a common question where people think, "Oh, it's my home. I've actually paid for all of the renovations or the refurbishments from new." But what's interesting, I've reached out to our good friends at BMT, spoke to Brad about this, and what's interesting is if it's not available for rent at the time that you incur the expense, then it's not a deductible expense because it would be considered secondhand. Get your head around that. You've paid for it as the principal place of residence owner. Um, it's brand new to you when you put it in, but as soon as you later down the track flick it over to investment property, those brand new items would be considered secondhand. So it's interesting, Ben. So a little caveat here, I'll just put a little asterisk. Um, Make sure you check with your accountant. Don't take advice from us. It's just a guide, all that sort of stuff. But I did reach out to the experts here, Ben.
Well, it's good because, I mean, initially when I saw the legislation come through, I thought, well, okay, I get it. What they wanted to do was once you take ownership of the property, any of the fixtures and fittings and the improvements that are being done aren't deductible other than obviously the broad write-down cost of the overall asset over the time period of that. So that was interesting for me in terms of fixtures and fittings. Then I thought, well, okay, well, if it is my home that I'm currently living in, but I'm upgrading to my next home and I want to turn that into an investment property, but I've done a little bit of reno and all, I'm thinking, well, I did own it. So maybe it should be, something that might have a deductibility attached to it. But again, I was wrong in terms of looking at the legislation. What it's clearly showing, to your point, Bryce, is the trigger point is that it's available for rent. And so if you're moving from your principal place of residence and you've done a nice little kitchen refurb and a bathroom refurb and so forth, unfortunately, that's not going to be deductible in terms of the fixtures and fittings as part of that those works. So what you want to be doing is potentially have your first phase of tenant coming in. And then if you've got plans to do some refits and so forth, because you're obviously the sequencing is right where you've had tenants in there, you weren't living in there, and then you basically, even if that tenant goes out, you can do some of that structural and more important work if you want to upgrade the value of that investment property. And then ultimately, the way I understand the legislation, that makes it very clear that is new investment in, and that is fully depreciable as part of that particular story. But to Bryce's point, just double check with your accountant, but it sort of makes it pretty clear. So disappointing that you aren't able to have those write-downs of the fixtures and fittings in the period that let's say you renovated 3 years ago and you're moving out, you just don't get those on the fixtures and fittings.
So Brad sent this to me, Ben Bradley Beer from BMT. So this is a direct quote. It's crucial to highlight that when property owners occupy the property, they won't be eligible for depreciation deductions on newly installed plant and equipment upgrades, as they'll be considered secondhand. They also won't be able to claim depreciation deductions during this time as it's not income producing. Here's the crucial paragraph. Investors are encouraged to wait until they have vacated the property and it becomes income producing before installing any new plant and equipment assets to ensure they don't miss out on these deductions. Hopefully that really summarises your question, Edward. And for a lot of people, that might be an aha moment, thinking, how can something I bought that I paid for be considered secondhand when I move out and put it onto the investment markets? Because it's all about the timing of when these items are brand new. So thanks to Brad for his help with that question. Next question is from Sean. Ben, this is about your very favourite topic, money management with business and a partner using the Moorr platform. Let's have a little listen to the question now from Sean.
Hey guys, thank you for the book, Make Money Simple Again. Completely went through it and it makes complete sense. I just got a question for you. I'm in the Moorr portal and I'm kind of doing all my expenses, income and all of that kind of stuff. The income that I derive is from my business. So I use my individual tax returns, average the two trust distributions, and that's what I've done for my income. However, with the debts, I've got a few debts in the business. I was just wondering whether I need to put that credit card debt in the Moorr portal, and then how to separate the expenses, because obviously I've got business expenses and whatnot, and what to add and what not to add. It was a query. The other question was, my partner and I do our banking separately. We derive our income separately, but then we kind of put a joint budget to kind of cover, groceries, car expenses, and any expense that is a joint expense. I'm just trying to figure out whether to just kind of do a separate portion for me and just kind of figure it out that way, or just really get her involved and bring her on to the Moorr portal and really nut down and kind of do it together. Any advice would be amazing. Thank you. Bye.
All right, 2 questions there, Ben. Part A is how do we treat business and individual? And part B is what happens if we've got 2 individuals under the same roof doing different ones? Which do you want to tackle first?
I think we'll start with the first question. Obviously, we've got the Money Smart tool built into the platform, and that is obviously doing all the calculations. Lots of dashboards in there now. So what we need to understand is the reason why it's so important that we treat household income versus business income is all got to do with the tax treatments and working out gross incomes and net incomes in terms of what we're able to spend. And because obviously this is about cash flow management. Now, we do know that from a business point of view that there are business taxes, and so companies pay tax and they pay tax between, say, 25 and 30% on the earnings that they make. So we are trying to separate those earnings out. So we say to anyone who's running, as a sole trader, well, a sole trader in terms of your business activities can be woven into one because effectively the income that's left over is your profit. But in terms of if you're running a small company or a small business in other ways or a partnership and those type of things, we want you to separate out all of your expenses from your business, from your personal activities. And then that way you're going to get a truer sense in terms of what is your cash flow into the household. Now, same, if you've got trusts, if you've got distributions coming in from those trusts as well, we want to see that as income coming in after tax in terms of what coming into the household as well. That is where you'll get the best value out of the platform, because ultimately Moorr is about household wealth creation and passive wealth creation. So that's whether that be through investing in property, through investing in shares or other accumulating assets. So hopefully that gives you a good summary in terms of why we have to separate that out to get a clearer understanding of true cash flow into the household, and then that trapping that surplus and then how we can put that surplus to work.
Just if I double click on that, that's the key point. Moorr is household. It's not every entity you've got, it's household. And I think if you can just get that framed up in your mind, everything feeds into it. If you're getting business income, well, we want to know what's declared on your tax return. If you're getting dividends and imputation credit, well, we want to know how that actually ends up in the household, not being flowed through Moorr as a calculation to work out the bottom line.
Yeah, and look, I mean, why does the ATO have an income for an ABN for a business? They need to do tax returns, and obviously trusts do tax returns as well. But individuals still have to do tax returns. So ultimately, the money's got to flow somewhere. And so we're just interested in the money that's flowing into the personal household. So if you want to get better at that, maybe look at a couple of your last 2 years' tax returns as part of that, which is obviously what Sean was alluding to there. In terms of the second part of the question, a lot of people may not realize this, but the Moorr platform, whether you be on the cloud web browser service or the mobile service, you can actually have a secondary account holder, i.e. your partner, wife, husband, partner, whatever that is. They can get access to a single platform. So you can both be working off the same particular platform. And that's a little bit unique. Not too many of these sort of money management platforms or personal financial applications and that type of thing have that functionality. We do, because obviously a lot of the households that we look after are mum and dads or couples with dual income. So we want to put those things together. So my advice to people is if you want to run Moorr and you want to see everything globally, that's the best way to do it, where the primary user introduces access to a secondary user all through a secure means to be able to do that. Now, if you do want to separate out your financial affairs and you want to keep separate things, well, then the other option is you can create 2 platforms. So you can create 2 different independent accounts, And all you're technically doing there is when you load your assets in, you'll just basically put your ownership at 50%, and you'll put your debt values at whatever the proportion of the debt that you hold is. It just means a little bit more work. So that's why I'm a big fan of, couples working together in terms of organising their finances. But look, if you're in a new relationship, I get it. And, you're maybe still saving up for a deposit for a house, but you're not, formally in a strong relationship yet, or whatever that is. Setting up two independent platforms can work. You just need to obviously separate out the assets, a portion to the interest that you hold, and obviously any debts associated with that as well.
Yeah, well, I guess we're assuming too here in your question, Sean, at the end, you give us a little hint that there might be an opportunity to merge, because if you're just staunchly, we are separate, then go to Ben's one where you have two platforms. But there is an opportunity if you are fresh in a relationship or you're just trying to work this out. The provisioning is wonderful. So if one person is nervous that someone's overspending to the tune of someone else, which is why you've kept it separately, there's a lot of checks and balances along the way that you can do to make sure that you are on the same page, and it doesn't. If Ben, we'd like to think that we married or in a relationship, long-term relationship with people who have similar money habits to us, but chances are the yin and the yang suggest that there's a few disparities, but there are clear ways that people can merge, have transparency, have conversations around that, so that they don't have to feel insecure or anxious about, I feel like it'd be a great idea on paper to merge our stuff, but how would that work in reality?
Look, one of the important drivers of trying to simplify one's banking and financial management to one primary account, one credit card, and one debit for living and lifestyle card is about transparency, and it is about getting everyone in the household on the same page, because, in terms of decisions of what people spend their money on, sometimes that's very personal. And, but if you don't have that connection, we know that relationships that have money difficulties, it's the third biggest reason why most households break up. So we want households to actually have conversations around money. It's a big part of how we set up, in terms of the money management portion of our show. So I'm highly encouraged of that. But if you're in an early relationship and you're running independent credit cards in the earlier stages, then you're probably better off having two separate accounts. But then what we want to see is a merging of those two as you get more serious in your relationship. And we would love to see you run off one credit card, because it just makes life so much easier, and one debit card. So, because the whole idea of setting up your 12-month, your money smarts and forecasting the spending that you're going to do over the next 12 months is you put everything down. And so just do what you said you were going to do. And as a couple, that will mean you'll trap more surplus. And if you trap more surplus, you're likely to create enough wealth that will supplement you in retirement. And that's the point here. I mean, the whole idea of building these habits and building these routines are all about that. Now, if you're worried about setting up two separate accounts and then moving into one later on, but you want to keep all that historical data, I've got some super exciting news, Bryce. We have been working behind the scenes for the last 7 months, and in terms of really building out the true sophistication of the platform as well. And so shortly, and I'm hoping it's before Christmas, we will be able to announce some incredibly powerful new features that will be coming into the Moorr platform, which will allow you, because we love the power of historical information, because when we can see progress being made, that's likely to continue to keep reinforcing those habits and those actions. So we are going to bring in a feature called As At Dates, and that will allow you to potentially move from your old spreadsheets, bring all of that historical data into the platform, and then start to see all your insights in there. So a little sneak peek for our TPC community. I think it's really important for them to understand that. Remember, it's free to use. It always will be. We've made that complete commitment to you in terms of the money smarts, and the basic platform will always be free to use. And we've got some exciting new sort of tools and features that are currently in development at the moment, which we'll be launching over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. And we are not done. We've got huge plans in terms of what we're going to be building out for our community to be able to use this basically lifestyle by design platform.
And it'd be worth sort of painting a picture in our community's mind that there is a core team that you speak to regularly. It's not just you tinkering away after hours. There's a core team of highly dedicated, capable professionals who are Like this is a major focus for us. If it sort of sounds like it's just by the by on the podcast, no, it is a major focus for us because we see it as everyone's walking around with their phone, Ben. So if we can find a way to get their money management simplified and simple and transparent and easier and trapping more surplus, because your income is your greatest wealth creation tool. So if you can trap more of it and put it into assets. So I just wanted to build that for folks.
Well, I think the other thing
You're the visionary, but it's the people doing the zeros and the ones behind the scenes that are just making it happen.
Well, I mean, if you haven't sussed it out, I mean, we've actually even got a new website we haven't even spoken about on the pod yet.
Oh, the website's great.
Check out the new website. I mean, that just shows you the level of functionality that's now built into the platform. If you just go to the product features list, you'll be surprised in terms of just how sophisticated it currently is. So if you're thinking, well, I'm okay, but the whole idea here is we're on a mission to simplify how you have to do all this stuff, to take all the friction out, but get all the value. So if you can, it's like getting fit by sitting on a couch. If we can nail that, that's the product vision. It's basically telling you when you need to do things, so you can actually get the best value out of it. And obviously part of that is what we're moving towards in terms of all this functionality behind the scenes that's just going to allow for these rich insights and these nudges that the smart assistant that's built into the platform is going to deliver to you. So, if you think about a personal assistant for money management, that's the roadmap that we're on.
Moorr.com.au, MOOR.com.au. Go and check it out, folks. Hey, our next one is an observation from a client of ours, Ben. Didn't want us to say his surname. So this person is Greg B. And just wanted to give us some observation around his journey as a property investor, which supports some of the conversations that you and I have around the perspective from the property investor. So let's have a little listen. I'm going to read this one out because it was an email that was sent to me. Hi, Bryce and Ben. I've been loving the winter series and listening with interest to some of the conversations, your show and others, that all landlords are rich, heartless bastards, in brackets, excuse the language, who are just taking advantage of the rental crisis, and wanted to add our own recent experience to try and provide some balance. We have a property in the northeast of Adelaide that has come up for a lease renewal, and we were presented with two options / recommendations from our property manager to consider. Option one, in line with what has been unprecedented rental increases, in brackets, well, at least in the 20 years I've been investing in closed brackets in the area, apply what they called a modest increase of $30 per week to the current rent. Option number two, not renew with this tenant and place the property on the market with no changes to the property other than an outgoing clean at current market rental rates, which would see us attain somewhere between, wait for it, $130 to $150 per week increase. Now, to put that into perspective, option one, a $30 per week increase, would be the biggest increase we have ever applied to this property in the 18 years we have owned it. Historically, we've only ever applied increases of $5 to $15 per week, even when reletting to the market. And in brackets, across the COVID, we applied $0 for no other reason than it felt the right thing to do, close brackets. So to apply a $30 increase would have been huge, let alone attain $100 plus. So what did we do? I hear you ask. Well, for us, it was a no-brainer. We have a great tenant who's been in the property for over 7 years, treats it as if it's her own. In brackets, she is a single middle-aged lady who initially had her daughters at home with her, but is now there alone, close bracket, and who would struggle to find an equivalent rental in this market if we did not renew. So it was an easy decision for us to offer a renewal of $20 per week, still large in our eyes, but we felt fair, in brackets, which we signed up within a couple of hours. We did this despite seeing, since October 2019, our interest costs on this property go up 116%, in brackets, $11,200 per annum, whilst only passing along 4%, in brackets, $780 per annum, rental increase to our tenants over that same period. Yes, we could have tried to recoup more from our existing tenant and not renewing and grabbing one of the many people who we know would be queuing up to secure a property like ours. However, the combination of it just not passing the sleep tax test, I like that, Ben, as one of your guests so well put it recently, as the right thing to do, and knowing this is a long-term play where we have built up our buffers in brackets, in parts thanks to your teachings, close brackets, over the years that allow us to ride out this period, do the right thing by our tenant, and still be on our path to being self-funded retirees in 5 to 10 years. Hang in, Ben, I'm almost there. Anyway, sorry this has become such a long email, but I felt the need to share and confirm what you've been saying over the last few months. Not all property owners are bastards. Many of us are genuinely play the balancing game of trying to set ourselves up to be comfortable, in brackets, not outrageously rich, in retirement without being a financial burden on society. We are also very aware that at the end of the day, there is a person/family calling our property home that needs to be treated respectfully as well. I hope that helps what you're doing. Thanks. Keep up the good work. And of course, go the Crows. Greg B. Interesting, Ben. Good feedback.
Yeah, it's brilliant feedback, Bryce, because this is lost in all of the hyperbole that's happening at the moment in the whole rental space. And let's, we've said it before, but let's keep acknowledging it. Yep, there are tenants who are doing it super tough at the moment. But what we're also seeing is a really strong narrative that's sort of driving this story that mum and dad property investors, and that they don't have low incomes. The only reason why they have low incomes is because they get the negative gearing benefit, which reduces their income that's reported through the ATO. And so, we're being treated as an ATM machine politically. The politicians think it's easier to come after our money, but the unfortunate consequences of that is that increases the cost of us holding those particular properties, and ultimately that means that we do have to pass on some of those costs, and that's why the narrative we are going to be talking about in terms of small business owners, because that's what we are. And so if the narrative around mum and dad property investors is becoming toxic, and the whole idea of being greedy property investors is becoming toxic, let's just remind people of the tens of billions of dollars that's invested by these small business owners that provide critical infrastructure, i.e. accommodation, shelter infrastructure for over 2.4 million people. 2.4 million dwellings across this country are being offered by these property investors, these small business owners. And so, Bryce, we're going to talk more about the results from the PIPA survey, but I just wanted to highlight one of the questions that was in the survey, because I think this brings it home at the moment that these small businesses are super challenged in a lot of respects. Now, in Greg B's case, and I know in my personal case, my interest costs have gone up through the roof, but I've been respectful. And Bryce, also, you're saying the same thing. So now, in terms of, here's the question. If your costs have increased, how much have you passed on to your tenants to recover those increased costs for those out-of-pocket expenses? 55%, and Greg B is in this case, said less than 10%. So they've recovered less than 10%. So in other words, 90% of the cost that they're borne on that property is being borne by them in terms of finding that out of their own budget. And then a further 27% between 15 and 25%. So quick math sort of says to you around that sort of 82, 83% of small business owners are effectively only passing on up to 25% of the increased cost that they've experienced. Now, that's extraordinary. I mean, if we were treated like other small businesses around the country, we would have politicians saying, this is not right. We've got to fix this. We've got to fix this problem. But that's the reality that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of a lot of small business owners, these mum and dad property investors, have had to subsidise their rents to maintain and hold on to their property, but they are passing on a lot of that, in terms of subsidising rent for their current tenants.
Yeah, the local Thai restaurant around the corner, Ben, awesome Thai, love it. Right, had a little note on there. We know due to the increase in costs, we've had to increase our prices. Sorry for the inconvenience. And so it's a small business who've actually had to do the same thing. There's obviously no declaration of the percentage, right? But I guess to the point that you just raised, and to the point that we're trying to create on this podcast, is that property investors are no different. They're small business owners who are absorbing costs, and overwhelmingly, based on that survey you've just described, anecdotally what Greg B's just shared there, the disproportionately, very disproportionately passing those zones. So I just thought there's obviously no question there. It's just an observation, Ben,
Yep.
but I think it's worth sharing with our community that that is just one story. And I'm sure we'd have a whole ton of people being able to write in and send me an email with a similar story to say, hey, look, and Greg is a wonderful human. He's put his heart first and said, what's the best interest of a tenant who I've had for 7 years, and they're a person. They're not a thing. They're a person, and that's how I'm going to treat them. So well done, Greg, on that. And mate, you are definitely going to be on your way to success because I know your portfolio intimately. So well done. Great questions. Just want to say thanks to those folks who have contributed today. I think there's obviously some really good insights. I want to encourage each and every one of you, if you have cost of living questions, you have something to do with interest rates, you have any question that you've got to your portfolio, if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au, there is a little widget there. It's called SpeakPipe. It's yellow. It's on the side. And everyone's done Zoom calls and Teams calls. So everyone's used to speaking on computer now, Ben, so it shouldn't be intimidating to anyone. So if you've got a question that's specific to you that you think that we would answer that is generic, that will benefit the community, because I get a lot of questions, Ben, that are so super narrow and specifically for the person. And it's we want to be able to answer your question in a way that it benefits all the people listening at the same time. So if you've got a question that you think is specific to others as well that you want to answer, please go leave those and we will read those out in an upcoming episode of the podcast. As I pivot to my life hack today, Ben, my most favorite social media platform is without a doubt YouTube. I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I think it's the greatest gift to all of us that we can go and learn something from someone on YouTube. I even watch Mr. Beast with the kids, Ben, because I'm learning something from him too. Let me promise you, the guy is a juggernaut when it comes to YouTube.
Yeah.
But there is quite often there's videos that come into the feed that I want to watch later when I'm waiting for at the Thai restaurant, whilst I'm waiting for my order to come through, I'm waiting to pick up the kids or something like that. So I just want to remind folks that there's a feature where you can save it to watch later, where you can go back later. And some of you might go, oh, yeah, no worries. Well, you can actually create other playlists too, because sometimes I find a video that's in a particular category, like investing, or I might see something that comes up that that our peers are doing. I put it into a peers. So you can put them into all these folders. So later on. So just a reminder, folks, that there is a watch later and you can re-put that into another folder as well to get a little more specific, as well as easily removing them later. So that's my life hack today, Ben. If you're a YouTube consumer like I am, make sure you use the playlists where you're seeing a video. It's super easy. Watch it later. Get back to it when you can. Are you a big on YouTube, Ben, on your phone or just on your desktop?
No, definitely on my phone. So when I row in the mornings, I pick a sort of segment that I can put I put the phone on the dashboard there, and I can basically watch whilst I'm rowing. And so I'm watching a hell of a lot of AI stuff, and also a bit of classic Warren Buffett essay stuff at the moment, and sort of some of that fundamental stuff. So no, I love it. It's I don't spend a lot of time sitting there watching YouTube on the television. It's my go-to, and it's learning what I like. So I don't mind the algorithms giving me the latest stuff on ChatGPT and all of the AI and smart assistant stuff, which I'm deep diving into at the moment.
One of my favourites is this low and slow barbecue basics, Ben, because I've got the old school Weber kettle and I go out and slow cook all the meats and stuff. And one of the guys that I follow on YouTube is Adelaide based. His name's Aaron Palmer.
Yeah.
He's just gone on to My Kitchen. I think it's My Kitchen Rules. Is that the show? So that's been interesting to watch him sort of over the journey, teach me how to get the crispiness on the pork crackling, Ben, and all those sorts of things. So,
Beautiful.
What's making property news?
Well, I thought, we've been off air in terms of we've had to pre-record a few of the recent episodes. And so in that time that we were both away, I actually attended the inquiry into the rental and housing affordability crisis here in Victoria. Obviously, we've seen Mr. Andrews.
Well, no, you didn't attend. You participated.
Well, that's right. I was a speaker at that inquiry, and so we're obviously I've got transcripts of that information. But it really does highlight to me. So we had obviously a couple of Greens Party politicians, a couple of Labor, a couple of Liberal, and one Cannabis Party representative who obviously got to sit through that. I sat in co-chair of speaking with Property Council of Australia. So, look, some of the key takeaways I got from presenting at that particular inquiry was just one of, I suppose, the lack of understanding and the depth of knowledge that most of the politicians have around this situation. It's really clear that you would have recency bias and a general bias is if all you're hearing, from the tenancy associations who are very well funded, who are obviously lobbying government all the time. Here, how about this case study? This person just had a $120 increase. This person just had a $60 increase. And this person was treated like this, and this property's minimum standards were like this. It was really refreshing. This was potentially, we had a couple of great property managers talk about the challenges that they're facing with the minimum standards, that there's lots of great properties out there, but they don't meet minimum standards because they're very old, and so they're not being let. And the property managers are saying, we could let a lot more properties out there if you would just reduce the minimum standards from the current levels that they are. These are safe properties that you can enjoy quite, but they don't meet the modern standards. So that's another example of where, we're desperate for stock here in Victoria. That everyone knows that Victoria is the worst place to invest in Australia at the moment. And that's only going to get worse with the current situation. So, yeah, we did a lot of lobbying in around, what's needed. We've given those recommendations, and I do have the transcript from that. So we might sort of also put a sort of a link in the show notes to that transcript. It was live broadcast as well, so I'm seeing whether I can get a copy of that video as well. So I'll keep you posted. But yep, I'm wearing my picker hat. I'm doing a lot of lobbying. I'm trying to get representation and a presentation at the federal inquiry that's being led by the Greens because there's just a lot of misinformation in there. And I think one of the big takeaways that I had for these ministers and members of Parliament was that it is a case-by-case basis in terms of what we just heard from Greg B, that his costs have gone up $11,000, but he's only put the rent up $20 a week, right? And so unfortunately for some people, they have to put the rent up as high as they can get it to maintain their asset. Otherwise, they could be selling at a loss. We also know the incredible cost to buy property, high stamp duties and high exit fees as well. So, just that is the context. And I just feel like, as I said, that a lot of the narrative has been very much on the renter side and giving renters more power and more rights. But the consequences, the unintended consequences and the risk is if we don't see more investors coming into the market, there's going to be less stock for those tenants and those renters to be able to choose from. So that's super concerning from where I sit.
And also, whilst we've been on break, Ben, our Premier's resigned.
Yeah, I think I haven't been favourable to Dan Andrews in the way in which he's managed the Victorian economy. In my economic updates and that type of thing, the most important job of any political party is they've got to run a strong economy. You run a strong economy, and it just throws off tax receipts. And then that money is then able to obviously be, reinvested back into the critical infrastructure and the services and so forth that we need. What we've got here in Victoria is record levels of debt, and we've got the highest level of debt per capita. So, when you put it into actual people terms, and what's even worse about that, from a per capita level, we've got basically double the next state. So in other words, for each person in Victoria, I think we've got about $27,000 worth of debt. And the one underneath that is something like 13,000 or something along those lines. So the problem with this is that we've ultimately got to pay for it. I think we're paying about $12 million a week in interest. So that's interest costs. So that's money that we can't spend on further infrastructure or further services and the like. So now I've been obviously very critical of the economic management, and unfortunately that means that Victoria is going to have some difficult and challenging times ahead to try and get that debt under control. And so there's obviously ways in which they'll do that. They'll reduce the number of public servants and government workers, but they're also going to have to reduce their spend, but they're also going to have to tax us more in Victoria. And that's what we've seen. Land taxes going up. There's another 600,000 people who are going to experience land tax in Victoria, where effectively land tax kicks in at a $50,000 threshold. So you can understand my problem. But unfortunately, Dan Andrews isn't going to be held accountable for that. He's going off into retirement. And that's why I'm disappointed in terms of the leadership that he's shown through the state of Victoria.
There you go. All right, folks, we've covered a fair bit in today's show. I just want to shout out and say thank you to the people that contributed. So the first question came from Sean. Then second question came from Edward. Third question came from
Sean again.
Sean again. And thank you, Ben. And the fourth one, the commentary was from Greg B. So, as I said before, folks, we love it when you, the podcast for the people, when you actually get your questions. We want to hear your voice, and hopefully we've given them the insights that you were hoping for, mate. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you've obviously see what Ben's about to do. For those of you that audio, he is now. He did say before he's wearing his picker hat, but he's not. He's actually wearing his Magpies hat. So.
Premiers. Reigning Premiers, Bryce.
Premiers. So last time we have to talk about this for a while, Ben, but until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. And the pies acted.
Yeah, that was coming. See you next week, folks.